The humidity pressed down on Fort Bragg like a living thing. Captain Mackenzie Holloway stood at rigid attention as the North Carolina sun climbed over the eastern tree line, painting the obstacle course in shades of amber and shadow. Around her, 147 soldiers prepared for the monthly physical training tests that could make or break military careers. The course stretched ahead like a judgment rendered in wood rope and steel. Mac rolled her left shoulder, carefully feeling the familiar tightness that had become her constant companion. 6 months since Kandahar, 6 months since the explosion that had turned her from a capable officer into someone who woke up at 3 in the morning testing whether her arm would work properly that day. The doctors had cleared her for duty with modifications: modified pull-ups, modified rope climbs, modified expectations for a modified soldier. She hated that word, modified. The obstacle course didn't care about modifications. 12 pull-ups waited on those cold metal bars. A 20-foot rope climb that required grip strength she no longer possessed in her left hand. An 8-foot wall that demanded upper body power her shoulder couldn't deliver. 800 meters of sprinting that her legs could handle, but would it matter if she failed everything else and at the end the traverse wall? 20 feet of lateral movement supporting full body weight on hands alone, moving from hold to hold without touching ground. That one kept her awake at night. Colonel Marcus Brennan surveyed his assembled troops with the cold efficiency of a man who had spent 32 years breaking down excuses and building up soldiers. His steel gray eyes swept across the formation with the precision of a weapon system acquiring targets. When those eyes landed on Captain Holloway, they lingered with obvious skepticism. Brennan's uniform bore the creases of parade ground perfection despite the early hour. His silver hair was regulation length, swept back from a face that had seen too many deployments and buried too many soldiers. At 58, he moved with the careful deliberation of someone whose body remembered every hard landing, every forced march, every mistake that cost lives. In 8 months, he would retire. This was his final deployment cycle, his last chance to shape the force he would leave behind. Attention! Brennan's voice cut through the morning chatter like a blade through silk. 148 bodies snapped to position as one. Today's physical training test will determine your readiness for deployment to forward operating areas. I expect nothing less than excellence from each soldier in this formation. The 82nd Airborne Division does not deploy second-rate warriors. We deploy the best, or we don't deploy at all. The words hung in the humid air like a threat. Yes, sir. The response thundered back, unified and sharp, but Mac's voice caught slightly in her throat. Deployment. The word carried weight she wasn't certain she was ready to bear. Her medical file sat in Brennan's office, marked with red flags and cautionary notes. Her physical therapist had given her specific instructions about modified requirements. Instructions that asking for special treatment in front of her commanding officer would be career suicide. Lieutenant Garrett Aldrich stood 3 rows behind Mac, his lean frame tense with barely concealed anxiety. At 27, he still possessed the optimism of someone who believed hard work and loyalty could overcome institutional inertia. He had served under Mac's command for 18 months. He had watched her lead with the kind of tactical brilliance that made other officers take notes. He had also watched the IED footage from Kandahar 7 times, studying the moment everything changed. The moment his brother-in-law went down. The moment Captain Holloway became something more than just another competent officer. Sergeant Major Patricia Sullivan stood off to the side, clipboard in hand, red hair pulled back in the kind of bun that suggested she had been making that same style since boot camp 24 years ago. Her face showed nothing. Pat Sullivan had perfected the art of the unreadable expression somewhere between her 3rd deployment and her first divorce. She evaluated soldiers based on one criterion: could they complete the mission when everything went to hell? Sympathy was for civilians. Pity was for the weak. Results were all that mattered. Captain Derek Hammond stretched near the pull-up bars, making a show of his flexibility and strength. At 34, he represented the old guard's last stand against what he considered the weakening of military standards. Women in combat roles, wounded warriors staying in deployment-ready units, modified physical requirements. To Hammond, these represented the thin end of a wedge that would eventually split the military's effectiveness wide open. He didn't hide his opinions. He didn't need to. Enough senior officers agreed with him that his vocal skepticism enhanced rather than damaged his career prospects. Holloway, Brennan's voice carried across the training ground with the force of a command detonation. Mac's heart sank. She had hoped to blend into the formation to complete her test quietly without drawing attention to her limitations. That hope died with the sound of her name. Yes, sir. She stepped forward, maintaining perfect military bearing, despite the anxiety building in her chest like a pressure wave. Brennan walked toward her with measured steps, his boots striking the packed earth with metronomic precision. "I've been reviewing your medical file, Captain." The words carried across the morning air. Soldiers who had been stretching, preparing, focusing on their own challenges, now turned their attention to this public confrontation. In the military, your medical file was supposed to be private, but commanding officers had access. And Brennan had never been one to respect the spirit of regulations when the letter gave him room to maneuver. "The file indicates you requested modified PT requirements due to a shoulder injury sustained in combat operations." Brennan's voice remained level professional, but the words landed like accusations. "Is that correct, Captain?" "Yes, sir." Mac kept her voice steady. "The medical board recommended temporary modifications while I complete my recovery protocol." "Temporary." Brennan repeated the word as if tasting it for hidden meanings. "How long is temporary, Captain? 6 months? A year? 5 years? At what point does temporary become permanent? At what point does a soldier with permanent limitations accept that they no longer belong in a combat-ready unit?" The questions hung in the air like smoke from an artillery strike. Around the training ground, conversations died. Stretching ceased. 147 pairs of eyes focused on the drama unfolding before them. Mac felt the weight of those stares like physical pressure against her spine. Some faces showed sympathy, others curiosity. A few displayed the harsh judgment that came from soldiers who had never questioned their own physical capabilities, who had never faced the moment when their bodies betrayed them in the middle of a mission. "Sir, with respect, my injury was sustained in combat while completing a successful mission." Mac chose each word carefully, keeping her tone professional, despite the anger building behind her sternum. "The injury does not affect my ability to lead soldiers or make tactical decisions under pressure. Leadership starts with example, Captain." Brennan stepped closer, lowering his voice just enough that nearby soldiers had to strain to hear. "How can you expect your soldiers to follow someone who can't complete basic physical requirements? How do I know you won't fold under pressure when lives are on the line, when my soldiers are depending on you to have their backs?" The question struck deeper than Brennan might have intended, or perhaps exactly as deep as he meant it to. Mac had asked herself the same question countless times during the long nights of recovery, during the physical therapy sessions that left her trembling and nauseous, during the moments when she looked at her left arm and wondered if the woman who had charged into enemy fire without hesitation still existed beneath the scars and medical restrictions. "I understand your concerns, sir." Mac measured each word like ammunition before loading it into the breech. "But my injury was sustained while carrying a 195-pound soldier plus 40 pounds of gear across 420 meters of hostile terrain under direct enemy fire. I completed that mission. I'll complete this one." For just a moment, something flickered across Brennan's face. Surprise, perhaps, or reassessment. But it vanished before Mac could identify it with certainty. "Combat injuries are part of the job, Captain." Brennan's voice hardened again. "But so is recovering from them completely. I've seen too many soldiers try to push through limitations and end up putting their entire unit at risk. I've seen good soldiers die because their leader's body couldn't cash the checks or their pride was riding." The words carried the weight of experience, of hard lessons learned in blood and consequence. Mac understood his perspective. Unit cohesion and safety depended on every member performing at peak capability. A weak link in the chain could snap under pressure, sending the entire system into catastrophic failure. But she also knew that her injury didn't make her weak. It made certain physical tasks more challenging, yes. But challenge and impossibility were not the same thing. "What are you proposing, sir?" Mac asked, though she already dreaded the answer forming in the spaces between Brennan's careful words. Brennan pulled a document from his cargo pocket. The paper looked official, typed, formatted with the kind of precision that suggested hours of preparation. "I'm proposing you either complete this PT test at full standards without any modifications, or you accept a transfer to a non-deployment ready unit. I've already drafted the transfer orders. Logistics Battalion at Fort Lee, needs experienced officers for supply chain management. Honorable work, important work. Work that doesn't require you to risk your soldiers' lives when your body can't keep up. The ultimatum hit Mac like a physical blow. Fort Lee, supply chain management, desk work, administrative duties for the remainder of her service. Everything she had worked for, every sacrifice she had made, reduced to managing spreadsheets and inventory reports far from the action where she belonged. Sir, I request permission to attempt the full PT test. Mac's voice emerged stronger than she felt. No modifications. Full standards. Brennan studied her face for a long moment, searching for signs of doubt or false bravado. Captain, understand that if you fail or if you injure yourself further, the consequences will extend beyond just this test. Your entire future in this command will be in question. I will use your performance as a case study in why wounded warriors belong in support roles, not combat leadership positions. This isn't just about you anymore. This is about policy. The threat landed with crystalline clarity. Mac wasn't just fighting for her own career. She was fighting for every injured soldier who wanted to continue serving in combat roles. If she failed, Brennan would use her as evidence, as proof that modifications and accommodations were the first step toward compromised unit effectiveness. I understand, sir. Mac met his eyes without flinching. I accept those terms. Brennan nodded once sharp and final, then turned to address the assembled formation. Let this serve as an example to all of you. Standards exist for a reason. We maintain them because lives depend on them. Captain Holloway has chosen to prove she can meet those standards without accommodation. I respect that choice. I also expect each of you to hold her to the same level of accountability you would demand of yourself. He walked away, leaving Mac standing alone in a circle of attention she had never wanted. Aldrich caught her eye from his position in formation. His face showed worry mixed with determination. Blake Winters, his brother-in-law, was watching this through a live stream from Walter Reed Medical Center, 300 miles away. Blake, who couldn't walk yet. Blake, who owed his life to the woman now being publicly challenged to prove she deserved to wear the uniform. Hammond made no effort to hide his satisfied smirk. To him, this was justice. This was standards being maintained. This was the natural order reasserting itself after 6 months of what he considered inappropriate accommodation. Sullivan's expression remained neutral, but she made a notation on her clipboard. Evaluating, measuring, waiting to see what Mac was really made of beneath the rank and the injury and the determination. The sun climbed higher. The humidity thickened. Soldiers returned to their stretching and their preparations, but the atmosphere had changed. What had been a routine monthly evaluation had transformed into something else. A trial. A test with implications that extended far beyond one captain's career trajectory. Mac moved to the side of the formation, rolling her shoulder carefully. The pain was there as it always was, a deep ache that radiated from the scar tissue and nerve damage. She had learned to work around it during daily activities, learned to compensate, to adapt, to find alternative methods for tasks that used to be simple. But the obstacle course didn't care about adaptation. The course demanded specific movements, specific strengths, specific capabilities that her injury had stolen from her. She closed her eyes and let her mind drift back 6 months. Let the memories come sharp and vivid as shrapnel. The Afghan desert had been brutally hot that day, the kind of heat that turned metal surfaces into weapons and made every breath feel like inhaling liquid fire. Captain Mackenzie Holloway led her 8-person reconnaissance team through terrain that seemed designed by a malicious god specifically to punish human ambition. Rocky scree slopes that shifted underfoot, exposed ridgelines that offered no cover from observation or fire, a landscape that had been killing soldiers since Alexander the Great and showed no signs of stopping. Operation Copper Dagger. The mission brief had been straightforward: infiltrate a Taliban compound suspected of housing high-value intelligence materials, secure the target laptop, extract without engagement if possible, eliminate resistance if necessary, return to base by dawn. Staff Sergeant Blake Winters walked point, his 235 pounds of muscle and equipment moving with surprising grace across the treacherous ground. At 36, Blake represented the best of the NCO Corps: professional, experienced, utterly reliable under pressure. He carried an M249 squad automatic weapon. Like other soldiers carried rifles, the 22-pound weapon seeming weightless in his massive hands. Specialist Evelyn Marsh handled communications, her slender fingers dancing across encrypted radio controls with the precision of a concert pianist. At 25, she was the youngest member of the team, but her signals intelligence background made her irreplaceable. Corporal Jameson Riley served as the team medic, his aid bag packed with enough medical supplies to handle everything from minor wounds to catastrophic trauma. At 23, Doc Riley had already saved 7 lives across 2 deployments. He approached medicine with the same intense focus other soldiers applied to weapons maintenance. Mac carried her M4A1 carbine in the low-ready position, 5.56mm rounds chambered and ready. Her Sig Sauer M17 sidearm rode on her right thigh backup for when the carbine ran dry or situations required close-quarters precision. Fragmentation grenades hung from her vest within easy reach. She had loaded her own magazines that morning, checking each round individually because trust was earned through verification. The compound appeared exactly where intelligence had promised it would. A cluster of mud brick structures surrounded by a low wall positioned in a valley that offered excellent defensive positions for anyone inside. Max signaled her team into approach positions, silent hand gestures that they had practiced until they became a language more fluent than words. The initial breach went perfectly, too perfectly in retrospect. The door charges blew precisely on mark. The team flowed into the compound with the practiced efficiency of water finding the path of least resistance. They secured the laptop within 8 minutes of entry. Mission complete. Time to extract and return to base for debriefing and breakfast. Then the world exploded into chaos. The Taliban had been waiting. Not inside the compound. Outside. 30-plus fighters with PKM machine guns and RPG-7s positioned in the high ground surrounding the valley. They had turned the entire area into a kill zone, and Mac's team had walked straight into the center of the trap. The first burst of 7.62mm fire came from the North Ridge. Rounds impacted around the team like lethal hail, kicking up dirt and rock fragments. Mac's training took over muscle memory, developed through thousands of hours of drills and exercises. She identified cover, directed her team, returned fire toward muzzle flashes on the ridgeline. The team moved as one organism, each member understanding their role without needing orders. Suppressing fire, tactical movement, coordinated withdrawal toward the extraction point 420 meters to the east. Up a 15-degree grade, across exposed terrain, under direct enemy fire. They might have made it clean. They were good enough, trained enough, professional enough. Then the first IED detonated. The explosion was a 155mm artillery shell that some Taliban engineer had repurposed into an improvised explosive device. The blast wave hit like the fist of an angry god. The sound transcended hearing, became a physical force that turned the air itself into a weapon. Blake Winters took the worst of it. Shrapnel tore through his legs, severing his femoral artery and creating compound fractures that turned bone into fragments. Abdominal wounds pumped blood onto the desert floor with terrifying speed. He went down hard, his saw falling from hands that suddenly couldn't grip. Mac moved without thinking. Training and instinct merged into action. She covered the distance to Blake in seconds that felt like hours. Her aid kit came open with practiced efficiency. Tourniquet above the arterial bleed pulled tight enough to stop the flow, but not tight enough to guarantee amputation. Pressure dressing in the abdominal wounds, her hands working with the speed that came from knowing every second mattered. Morphine injection for the pain that would otherwise send him into shock. Doc's pinned down. Evelyn's voice crackled over the radio. Blake's your responsibility. Captain, enemy fire intensified. Rounds impacted within meters of their position. Mac made the decision that would define the rest of her career. The extraction point was 420 meters away. Blake weighed 195 pounds without gear, 235 with his equipment and weapons. The slope was steady uphill. The enemy fire was accurate and getting more so as the Taliban fighters adjusted their aim. Standard doctrine said to hold position and wait for the quick reaction force. Wait for backup. Wait for support. But Blake was bleeding out. The tourniquet would hold for now, but internal injuries were a question mark. Doc Riley was pinned down by machine gun fire and couldn't reach them. The QRF was 18 minutes out. Blake might not have 18 minutes. Mac looked at her wounded NCO, at the blood soaking into the Afghan soil, at the timer ticking down in her head toward catastrophic blood loss and death. Everyone move to the rally point, she barked the order into her radio. I've got Blake. Execute extraction protocol Delta. Move now. She didn't wait for confirmation. She grabbed Blake's drag handle and heaved, getting his dead weight onto her shoulders in a fireman's carry that her training had made automatic. 235 pounds settled across her back and shoulders like a judgment. Her legs took the weight, her back adjusted. Her arms locked Blake's limbs into position. Then she started moving. The first 50 meters were manageable. Adrenaline flooded her system, giving her strength beyond normal capability. Her boots found purchase on the rocky ground. Her breathing settled into the rhythm she had learned during countless training exercises. One foot, then the other. Don't think about the distance. Think about the next step. Enemy fire tracked her movement. Rounds cracked past with a distinctive snap that meant they were missing by inches rather than feet. The Taliban fighters had identified her as a target, a slow-moving target carrying a burden that made evasion impossible. Mac adjusted her route using whatever terrain features offered minimal cover. A small rise that blocked direct fire for 3 steps. A depression that bought her 5 seconds of concealment. She was a tactical problem solver even while carrying a dying man across hostile ground. At 100 meters, her left shoulder started to protest. The carry position put enormous strain on the shoulder joint and surrounding muscles. Pain began as a whisper and grew toward a scream with each step. At 150 meters, she had to stop and adjust Blake's position. His blood soaked through her uniform. His breathing sounded wrong, wet, and labored. But he was alive. She could feel his chest moving against her shoulder. Alive meant there was still time. Evie, I need suppressing fire on the North Ridge. Mac gasped into her radio. On it, Captain. Evelyn's response came immediately, followed by the sharp reports of return fire. Not enough to silence the enemy, but enough to make them cautious. Enough to buy Mac another 30 seconds of slightly reduced incoming fire. She started moving again. Her thighs burned with the effort of pushing uphill. Her lower back screamed at the weight distribution. Her left shoulder had graduated from pain to agony, the joint feeling like it was grinding bone against bone with each step. At 200 meters, she saw the second IED. The 105-millimeter shell sat half buried in the path ahead, its detonation wire running back toward a Taliban position 50 meters away. She had seconds to decide. Go around adding precious meters to a journey that was already pushing the limits of her endurance, or try to spot and cut the wire, risking detonation while she worked. The decision was made for her when the wire twitched. Some Taliban fighter pulling the trigger, trying to catch her before she could evade. Mac threw herself sideways, Blake's weight nearly pulling her off her feet. She landed hard, managing to roll, so Blake took minimal impact. The IED detonated where she had been standing 3 seconds earlier. The explosion was smaller than the first, but close enough that the blast wave slammed into her like a truck. Shrapnel from the shell casing turned into supersonic projectiles. She felt impacts against her back, her shoulder, her neck. Sharp pain that cut through the adrenaline and fatigue. Warm blood running down her skin beneath her uniform. 9 pieces of shrapnel had found her. Most were small fragments that embedded in muscle tissue. But one piece was different. A 3-centimeter chunk of casing that had punched through her left shoulder blade and lodged itself near the brachial plexus nerve cluster. Close enough to the nerves that any movement sent lightning bolts of pain radiating down her arm. Mac screamed. She couldn't help it. The pain transcended anything she had experienced before. Her left arm went partially numb, fingers tingling with the kind of sensation that warned of serious nerve damage. But Blake was still bleeding, still dying, still depending on her to complete the carry. She got to her feet. Her left arm hung at her side, mostly useless now. She adjusted Blake's position using her right arm to take most of his weight. The carrying technique was wrong now, unbalanced, putting strain on muscle groups that weren't designed to handle it. But it was the only option available. 220 meters to go, up a hill, under fire, with one functional arm and 9 pieces of shrapnel grinding against her insides with every movement. Max started moving again. Each step was a negotiation with physics and pain. Her right side bore weight it wasn't meant to carry. Her legs trembled with exhaustion. Blood loss made the world's edges fuzzy, reality taking on the quality of a badly tuned television signal. But she could see the extraction point now. See the landing zone where the helicopter would come. See her team establishing a defensive perimeter, laying down suppressing fire to cover her final approach. At 50 meters from the LZ, the Taliban made their final push. RPG rounds impacted around her position. Machine gun fire intensified to the point where the air itself seemed to be made of bullets. Mac's M4 carbine hung against her chest, impossible to access while carrying Blake. But her right hand could reach her Sig Sauer sidearm. She pulled the weapon, firing one-handed at muzzle flashes on the ridgeline while continuing to move forward. 43 rounds through her carbine and pistol during that final push. 5 Taliban fighters killed by shots taken while carrying a wounded soldier toward safety. The helicopter appeared over the eastern ridge exactly on schedule, the Black Hawk pilot bringing the bird into a hover, despite the incoming fire that spanged off the armored hull. Mac reached the LZ, literally collapsing as hands reached out to take Blake from her shoulders. "Get him loaded," she screamed at the medics, her voice raw. "He's got arterial bleeding and internal injuries." The crew chief reached for Mac, trying to pull her aboard, but she stayed on her feet, her Sig Sauer tracking toward the ridgeline, providing cover fire for the extraction. Doc Riley threw smoke grenades to obscure the helicopter from the RPG gunners. Evelyn coordinated final positioning, getting the entire team aboard in under 40 seconds. An RPG round streaked toward the helicopter. Max saw it coming, saw the trajectory that would slam the warhead directly into the bird's tail rotor. She adjusted her aim, fired 3 rounds at the launcher position. One round found the gunner's chest, throwing off his aim just enough. The RPG missed by meters, detonating harmlessly against the ridgeline. Hands pulled Mac into the helicopter. Blake was already on a stretcher, medics working frantically to stabilize him. The bird lifted, banking hard to escape the kill zone. Mac's vision narrowed to a tunnel, blood loss and shock finally overwhelming the adrenaline that had kept her moving. The last thing she saw before losing consciousness was Blake Winters, covered in blood, but breathing, alive. Mission complete. She woke up 3 days later in Landstuhl Regional Medical Center in Germany, tubes in her arms and monitoring equipment beeping steadily. The doctors told her she had lost 2.5 liters of blood, told her that 9 shrapnel fragments had been removed during emergency surgery, told her that the largest fragment had damaged her brachial plexus nerve cluster, creating permanent nerve damage that would affect her left shoulder's strength and range of motion for the rest of her life. They also told her that Staff Sergeant Blake Winters had survived, was in recovery, would walk again with prosthetics, was alive because she had carried him across 420 meters of hostile ground while wounded herself. Mac had smiled at that news, then asked when she could return to duty. The whistle blast brought her back to the present with the force of a slap. Fort Bragg, the obstacle course. The test that would determine whether the last 6 months of her life meant anything at all. Colonel Brennan stood near the starting line, clipboard in hand, face impassive. Sergeant Major Sullivan had positioned herself near the traverse wall, the final obstacle. Hammond stretched near the pull-up bars, making a show of his preparation, and Aldrich stood in the crowd, his phone held carefully, its camera pointed toward the course. Blake Winters was watching from Walter Reed, watching to see if the woman who had saved his life could save her own career. Mac took her position at the starting line. 147 soldiers watching. Brennan's ultimatum hanging over her head like a sword, her left shoulder already aching with anticipation of the punishment to come. She thought about Kandahar, about carrying 235 pounds across 420 meters, about completing the mission when her body screamed at her to stop. The obstacle course was only 100 meters of challenges. Her body weight, not Blake's. No enemy fire, no blood loss, no shrapnel grinding against nerves. She could do this. She had to do this. The whistle blew again. Soldiers surged forward toward their respective obstacles. Mac moved toward the pull-up bar, her heart pounding against her ribs like it was trying to escape. The bar was cold metal under her hands. She gripped tight, feeling the texture of the steel, the slight give in her left hand, where the nerve damage affected her grip strength. 12 pull-ups minimum to pass, 15 to meet airborne standards. She pulled. The first pull-up came from muscle memory carved into her body through years of training. Her arms bent, her chin cleared the bar, her core engaged to prevent swaying. The movement felt almost normal, her body remembering what it had done thousands of times before the injury. The second pull-up brought the first whisper of protest from her left shoulder. A tightness in the joint, a suggestion that something wasn't quite right. but manageable, within acceptable parameters. Third pull-up, fourth, fifth, sixth. Her breathing remained controlled, measured. She could hear other soldiers grunting with effort around her, the sounds of 100 bodies pushing against their limits. But her focus narrowed to the bar in her hands and the repetitions she needed to complete. Seventh pull-up. The protest in her left shoulder graduated from whisper to statement. Pain radiated from the joint, sharp and insistent. Her grip weakened slightly, her left hand not quite matching the pressure her right hand maintained. Eighth pull-up, her left arm began to tremble. Visible, obvious to anyone watching, and everyone was watching. Ninth pull-up. The trembling intensified. Her left shoulder felt like it was grinding bone against bone, the nerve damage creating sensations that went beyond simple pain into territory that had no adequate description. Her right arm compensated, taking more of the load, but the imbalance made the movement awkward. 10th pull-up. Her shoulder seized completely for 3 seconds. Mac hung by her right arm alone, her left arm useless at her side while her legs kicked slightly, trying to find purchase on air. The crowd had gone silent. Even the soldiers still completing their own repetitions paused to watch. In that moment of crisis, hanging by one arm, while her career dangled by an equally thin thread, Mac's mind flashed back to Afghanistan, to hanging from the Black Hawk's landing skid after nearly being thrown from the helicopter by turbulence, to Blake Winters's blood dripping from his stretcher onto her hands as she gripped the skid with everything she had, to the choice between letting go and falling 30 feet to probable death or holding on despite her wounded shoulder screaming at her to release. She had held on then. She would hold on now. Mac forced her left hand back to the bar through sheer determination. Her grip was weak, her arm shaking like a leaf in a hurricane, but it was there, providing some support, some contribution to the effort. 11th pull-up, her face contorted with pain she couldn't hide. A grunt escaped her throat, primal and raw, but her chin cleared the bar. 12th pull-up, the minimum requirement. She could stop here, could drop from the bar, having technically passed this obstacle. But Brennan had made it clear that technical success wouldn't be enough. He needed to see excellence, needed to see airborne standards met without compromise. 13th pull-up. Her vision narrowed, sweat stung her eyes. Her left arm was essentially decorative now, providing maybe 10% of the force needed. Her right arm bore the weight of her entire body plus the resistance of pulling upward against gravity. 14th pull-up. Her right arm was shaking now too, muscle failure approaching. The point where determination couldn't overcome physiology, where we'll hit the wall of biological limitation. 15th pull-up. She didn't know where the strength came from. Some reserve she hadn't known existed, someplace beyond muscle and tendon, where the simple refusal to fail became its own form of power. Her chin cleared the bar. Airborne standard met. Mac dropped to the ground, her legs almost buckling. Her left arm hung at her side, momentarily useless, the shoulder joint screaming protests that would leave her in pain for days. But she had passed, had exceeded the minimum requirement despite an injury that should have made it impossible. Sergeant Major Sullivan made a notation on her clipboard. Her expression remained neutral, but something in her eyes suggested recalculation. A soldier who could push through that kind of pain, who could adapt that quickly to compensate for a damaged limb, possessed qualities that standard metrics didn't capture. Captain Hammond's smirk had faded. He had expected failure, had anticipated watching Mac drop from the bar at 8 or 9 repetitions, proving his point about lowered standards and inappropriate accommodations. Instead, he had witnessed something that didn't fit his narrative. Lieutenant Aldrich grinned openly, his phone still recording, knowing Blake would watch this footage from his hospital bed and understand that the woman who had saved his life still possessed that same core of unbreakable determination. Colonel Brennan's face revealed nothing. He made a notation on his own clipboard and moved his attention to other soldiers completing their pull-ups. But Mac had seen something flicker across his expression in the moment she completed that 15th repetition. Surprise, perhaps, or recognition, or the uncomfortable realization that his assumptions might not align with reality. Mac moved to the rope climb station, giving her shoulder 30 seconds to recover, while other soldiers rotated through the course. The rope hung 20 feet from the ground, thick hemp that required perfect coordination between arms and legs. Standard technique involved gripping the rope with both hands, wrapping it around one leg, while bracing with the other, then using a combination of arm pull and leg push to ascend. Her shoulder couldn't handle standard technique. The pulling motion required to ascend using arms as the primary force would tear the damaged joint apart before she reached the halfway point. She approached the rope knowing she would have to innovate. Adaptation wasn't weakness. It was intelligence applied to changing circumstances. Mac gripped the rope, wrapping it around her right leg in what climbers called an S-wrap configuration. The technique used leg strength as the primary driving force, with arms providing stability and guidance rather than pulling power. She had practiced this during her physical therapy sessions, working with her therapist to find methods that allowed her to complete tasks despite her limitations. The ascent was slower than standard technique would have been. Instead of the smooth, powerful pulls that characterized a proper rope climb, Mac's method looked more like a caterpillar's progress. Lock the rope with her legs. Stand up using leg strength. Reach higher with her arms. Reset the leg wrap. Repeat. At 10 feet up, her left arm failed completely. The grip strength simply vanished her fingers, unable to maintain contact with the rope. She hung for a moment by her right arm, alone, her legs scrambling to maintain the wrap that was currently the only thing preventing a 20-foot fall onto packed earth. The watching crowd held its collective breath. This was the moment Hammond had been waiting for, the moment that would prove his point. Wounded warriors created liability, not capability. Mac's legs found purchase. She locked the rope wrap with fierce determination, taking all her weight on her lower body. Her right arm reached higher, gripping the rope above her current position. She couldn't use her left arm at all now, but she could use her right arm for balance and her legs for power. It wasn't pretty, it wasn't regulation technique. It violated every standard methodology for rope climbing that the Army taught in basic training. But she continued moving upward. 15 feet. Her right arm was trembling from the effort of maintaining balance while her legs did work they weren't designed to do alone. Sweat ran down her face into her eyes, dripping from her chin onto the rope below. 20 feet. She touched the marker at the top of the rope, the bell that signaled completion. Her hand was shaking so badly she could barely make it ring, but the sound carried across the training ground. Completion. Success through adaptation. The descent was controlled despite her exhaustion. She let the rope slide through her leg wrap in measured increments, using her right arm to prevent too fast descent, while her left arm hung useless at her side. When her feet touched solid ground, her legs shook with the effort of supporting her weight after the climb. Brennan made another notation. His expression remained professionally neutral, but he was evaluating something beyond simple pass-fail metrics now. He was watching how Max solved problems when standard solutions weren't available, watching how she adapted under pressure when her body refused to cooperate. The time was noted, 52 seconds. Standard time for rope climb was 30 seconds. By regulation standards, she had failed this obstacle, but she had completed it, had reached the top and descended safely despite an injury that should have made the climb impossible. The sprint section came as a relief, 800 meters where her legs could carry her without demanding contribution from her damaged shoulder. This was pure cardiovascular capability uncompromised by her injury, a chance to demonstrate that she remained a formidable athlete despite her limitations. The whistle blew. Mac exploded from the starting line with the pent-up frustration of the previous two obstacles fueling her legs. Her stride opened up, powerful and controlled. Her breathing fell into the rhythm she had learned during countless training runs. 4 counts in through her nose, 4 counts out through her mouth. Steady oxygen delivery to muscles burning through energy at an unsustainable rate. She passed soldiers who had completed their pull-ups faster than she had. Past soldiers whose rope climbs had been textbook perfect in half her time. Her legs were strong, uninjured, capable of the kind of sustained power that came from a decade of military training and natural athletic ability. At 400 meters, she was in the top 10% of all soldiers running the course. At 600 meters, she passed Captain Hammond, her longer stride and better conditioning, leaving him behind despite his earlier smugness. She crossed the finish line at 4 minutes and 2 seconds. 90% of the unit still hadn't finished. She had beaten the required time by 28 seconds, had proven that her injury affected specific capabilities without compromising her overall fitness. Hammond crossed the line 12 seconds behind her, breathing hard, his earlier confidence replaced by the uncomfortable realization that the wounded officer he had dismissed as a liability had just beaten him at a purely physical challenge. Mac allowed herself 5 seconds to catch her breath. hands on her knees, sucking in the humid North Carolina air. Then she moved to the wall climb station, the 8-foot barrier that would test whether she could overcome vertical obstacles without upper body pulling strength. The wall loomed before her, wooden and implacable. Standard technique was simple. Run at the wall, jump, grab the top edge, pull yourself up using upper body strength, swing your legs over, drop down the other side. Her shoulder couldn't execute a pull-up against her own body weight. Not safely, not without risking further damage that might end her career regardless of how this test concluded. Max studied the wall, her tactical mind analyzing angles and possibilities. She had watched parkour athletes use momentum and leg strength to overcome obstacles without relying on arm strength, had seen techniques that treated walls as launch points rather than barriers to be conquered through brute force. She backed up 20 feet, giving herself running space. Her approach would need to be fast, her timing perfect. One chance to get this right. Max sprinted toward the wall. At 3 feet away, she planted her right foot against the wall surface at chest height, using her forward momentum to drive upward in what parkour practitioners called a tic-tac maneuver. Her left leg swung over the wall's top edge. Her right arm grabbed for stability. For one precarious moment, she balanced on the wall's peak, her momentum the only thing preventing her from falling backward. Then gravity made its choice. She tipped forward, controlled the fall, with her legs landed on the far side harder than regulation technique would have allowed, but without injury. Complete. Successful. Unorthodox but effective. Captain Hammond's voice carried across the training ground, loud enough for nearby soldiers to hear. That's not regulation technique. She basically cheated the obstacle. Colonel Brennan turned to face Hammond, his expression cold enough to freeze water. Captain Hammond, what do the regulations specify about wall climb completion? Hammond opened his mouth, then closed it, realizing the trap he had walked into. The regulations specify that a soldier must clear the 8-foot wall and reach the opposite side without using external assistance. Brennan continued. The regulations do not specify the method by which this is accomplished. Captain Holloway cleared the wall. She used no external assistance. She completed the obstacle within regulatory parameters. The rebuke was subtle but clear. Hammond's face flushed red, but he remained silent. Mac didn't have time to appreciate Brennan's unexpected defense. The final obstacle waited. The traverse wall, 20 feet of lateral movement supporting full body weight on hands alone. The crucible that would determine whether her performance had been enough. She walked toward the wall, feeling the eyes of 148 soldiers focused on her movement. This was the obstacle that had haunted her nightmares for weeks. The one that demanded sustained grip strength from both hands. The one her damaged shoulder simply could not support for the required duration. The hand grips were evenly spaced along the wall, metal handles mounted into the wooden surface. Standard procedure was to grip the first handle, lift your feet off the ground, swing to the second handle, continue across all 20 feet without your feet touching earth. Ground contact meant automatic disqualification. No exceptions, no appeals. Mac gripped the first handle with both hands. Immediate pain shot through her left shoulder as it took her full body weight. She lifted her feet, hanging in space, her core engaged to prevent swaying. Second handle. She released her right hand, swung it to the next grip, pulled herself across the small gap. Her left hand followed, weaker, but functional. Third handle. Her left arm was already trembling. The sustained load was breaking down the compromised muscle tissue faster than on the pull-ups, where she had at least gotten brief rest between repetitions. Fourth handle. Her grip with her left hand felt uncertain, fingers not quite closing with the pressure they needed to maintain secure contact. Fifth handle. Pain radiating from her shoulder into her neck, down her arm, across her back. The kind of pain that warned of damage being done in real time. Sixth handle. Her left hand's grip failed for a moment, her full weight dropping onto her right arm before she could recover and get her left hand back on the handle. A near miss that sent her heart rate spiking. Seventh handle, halfway across. 10 more feet to go. Her left arm shaking so violently that soldiers in the watching crowd were wincing in sympathetic distress. Eighth handle. Her left hand simply could not maintain the grip anymore. Nerve damage had reduced her fingers to barely functional appendages. She hung by her right arm, her left arm dangling useless at her side, her feet kicking slightly as she tried to generate momentum to reach the next handle. The crisis moment. 3 seconds suspended in space with her career hanging by the same thin thread as her body. In that moment, hanging by one arm with failure, inches away, Mac heard Blake Winter's voice in her memory. Not from Afghanistan. From 2 weeks ago during a phone call from Walter Reed. "Ma'am, they're fitting me for prosthetics next week. The docs say I'll walk again. Maybe even run if I work hard enough at physical therapy." And you know what I tell them? I tell them I watched Captain Holloway carry my heavy ass across 400 meters of hostile ground while taking enemy fire. If she could do that, I can damn sure learn to walk on artificial legs. She had carried 235 pounds for 17 minutes. She could hold her own 135 pounds for another 12 seconds. Max swung her left hand back to the handle through sheer force of will. Her grip was pathetic, providing maybe 15 pounds of support. But 15 pounds was better than zero, better than giving up. Ninth handle. Her right arm doing 90% of the work, her left hand barely maintaining contact, but both hands on the wall, both contributing, still in the fight. 10th handle. Her vision narrowed to a tunnel. Sweat dripped from her face onto the ground 8 feet below. Ground that she absolutely could not touch without automatic failure. 11th handle. Her right arm was failing now too. Not from injury, but from sheer exhaustion. From taking load it was never designed to carry alone. Her forearm muscles burned with the kind of fire that preceded complete failure. And then her left hand slipped. Her fingers couldn't maintain even the minimal grip they had been providing. Her full weight dropped onto her right arm. Her feet swung down, searching for balance that didn't exist. The crowd gasped. Brennan stepped forward slightly as if preparing to catch her or call the medics. Mac's feet touched the ground. A brief contact, maybe half a second, but unmistakable. Technical failure. Automatic disqualification. Every regulation, every standard, every rule said she should drop from the wall now. Except the failure. Acknowledged that her injury had proven Brennan's point. But Blake Winters was watching from Walter Reed. Lieutenant Aldrich was recording this for every wounded warrior who had been told they couldn't. Sergeant Major Sullivan was evaluating whether pain tolerance and adaptation could compensate for physical limitation. And Mac had not carried a dying soldier across 420 meters of hell just to quit 9 feet from the end of a training exercise. She pulled herself back onto the wall, her right arm screaming, her left shoulder on fire, her core engaged with every muscle fiber she could recruit. She reached for the 12th handle. The watching soldiers had gone completely silent. This was no longer a regulation PT test. This was witnessing something beyond standard military evaluation. This was watching a warrior refuse to accept defeat even when the rules said defeat had already been determined. 13th handle, Mac's right arm alone pulling her across gaps her left arm couldn't bridge. Her legs providing what assistance they could by reducing her body's sway. 14th handle, her grip strength in her right hand was failing, fingers slipping on metal that had become slick with her sweat. But she held on. 15th handle, 3/4 complete, 5 feet to go. 16th handle. Her right forearm felt like someone had poured gasoline into the muscle tissue and lit a match, burning from the inside out. 17th handle. Her vision was graying at the edges, blood pressure dropping from pain and exertion, her body trying to shut down systems to preserve core function. 18th handle. She could see the end now. The final handle. The completion of this obstacle that had beaten her once but would not beat her twice. 19th handle. Her right hand reached across the gap with nothing left in reserve. Her fingers closed around the metal with the last functional muscle fibers she possessed. 20th handle. Final handle. End of the obstacle. Mac's hand closed around it and held for 3 seconds, proving completion, demonstrating she had reached the end despite the ground contact that had technically disqualified her. Then she dropped to the ground, her legs barely supporting her weight. Her right arm hung at her side now, too, both arms temporarily useless from exertion. She stood there breathing hard, sweat soaking through her uniform shoulders, screaming in pain that would require serious medication to manage. But she had completed the course, had proven that her injury didn't prevent her from overcoming obstacles, had demonstrated that adaptation and determination could compensate for physical limitation. The silence broke with a sound that surprised everyone. Applause, starting with one soldier, then another, then spreading through the watching formation until 148 soldiers were clapping for a performance that had technically failed regulatory standards, but had succeeded at something more fundamental. Colonel Brennan walked toward Mac with measured steps. His face remained unreadable, professional distance maintained. When he reached her, he spoke quietly enough that only she could hear. "Captain Holloway, my office. Now." The applause died. The crowd's mood shifted from appreciation to concern. This was the moment of judgment, the decision that would determine whether Mac's performance had been enough or whether Brennan would use her technical failure as proof that wounded warriors belonged in support roles. Mac followed Brennan across the training ground toward the headquarters building. Her legs were shaky, her shoulders throbbed with pain that was rapidly transitioning from acute to chronic. But she walked with her spine straight, her bearing professional, her expression controlled. Behind her, she heard Lieutenant Aldrich's voice quiet but carrying across the morning air. "Blake just texted. He said to tell you that was the most badass thing he's ever seen. And he's seen some serious badass stuff." A small smile touched Mac's lips, despite the anxiety building in her chest about the conversation waiting in Brennan's office. Sergeant Major Sullivan fell into step beside Brennan, her clipboard tucked under her arm. Captain Hammond trailed behind his earlier smugness, replaced by something more complex. Perhaps respect, perhaps resentment, perhaps both. The walk to Brennan's office took 90 seconds but felt like hours. Mac's mind raced through possible outcomes. Transfer orders to Fort Lee already drafted. Administrative duties for the remainder of her career. The end of everything she had worked for since enlisting 11 years ago. Or approval, deployment. The chance to prove that her performance today represented her true capabilities, not the technical failure of touching ground on the Traverse Wall. Brennan's office was exactly as Mac remembered from previous meetings. Sparse, professional, dominated by maps of deployment zones and photographs from 3 decades of military service. A shadow box on one wall held medals and insignia from Brennan's career. On his desk, a single-frame photograph showed a younger man in desert camouflage smiling despite obvious exhaustion. Brennan gestured to a chair. "Sit down, Captain." Max sat grateful to take weight off her trembling legs. Sullivan remained standing near the door. Hammond took a position against the wall, observing but not participating. Brennan settled into his own chair behind the desk. He pulled out the clipboard with his notes from the PT test, studied it for a long moment, then set it aside and looked directly at Mac. "You failed the Traverse Wall," he stated. "Ground contact is automatic disqualification. By regulatory standards, you did not pass this PT test." The words landed like hammer blows. Mac kept her expression neutral, despite the disappointment crushing her chest. She had known the rules, had known that touching ground meant failure, had done it anyway because quitting felt worse than failing. "Yes, sir," she replied. "I understand." "Do you?" Brennan's tone was impossible to read. "Do you understand what you demonstrated out there?" Mac hesitated, uncertain where this line of questioning was leading. Brennan continued before she could formulate a response. "Before I make my final determination, I need to make a phone call. With your permission." He reached for his desk phone without waiting for her answer, dialed a number from memory, put the call on speaker. The phone rang 3 times before connecting. A woman's voice, professional and crisp, came through the speaker. "General Blackwell's office? This is Colonel Marcus Brennan, 82nd Airborne. I need to speak with General Blackwell regarding Captain Mackenzie Holloway's PT test performance. It's urgent." "One moment, sir." The whole music lasted 15 seconds. Then it cut off, replaced by a voice that carried the kind of authority that came from commanding Special Operations Forces in hostile territory. "Colonel Brennan, I've been waiting for your call. I reviewed the footage from Captain Holloway's PT test. All of it." Mac's eyes widened slightly. "General Catherine Blackwell, JSOC Commander, the highest-ranking female combat veteran in the United States military. A legend who had fought through every barrier the military could construct to become one of the most respected operational commanders in the armed forces. And she had been watching Mac's PT test. The final days before deployment were a blur of final preparations and personal farewells. Colonel Brennan's retirement ceremony was scheduled for the day after the task force departed, but he made time for a private meeting with Mac in his office. "Major, I want you to understand something about this mission," Brennan said quietly. I'm retiring whether Atlas Stone succeeds or fails, but my legacy depends entirely on how this operation concludes. If you succeed, I'll be remembered as the officer who had the wisdom to recognize that wounded warriors bring unique value to special operations. If you fail, he didn't need to finish the sentence. I'm not placing this burden on you to create pressure, he continued. I'm sharing it so you understand how much faith I'm placing in you, in your capabilities, in everything you've proven about adaptation and determination. He handed Mac a small wooden box. Inside was his father's combat infantry badge, the same one from the photograph. My father wore this for 12 years after losing his arm. Carry it into Syria. Let it remind you that you're part of a legacy, that you're proving what my father believed and what I forgot for too long. Mac accepted the box with reverence. Sir, I'll bring it back. With the hostages, with the team, all of them. I know you will, Major. I have complete faith in you. Blake Winters made the journey from Walter Reed to Fort Bragg for the final day before deployment. He walked into the task force ready room on prosthetic legs, using forearm crutches for stability, but moving under his own power for the first time in 6 months. The entire task force stood and applauded. This was the man Major Holloway had saved, the living proof that adaptation could overcome catastrophic injury. Winters made his way to where Max stood reviewing final equipment checks. Ma'am, every step I take is because of you. You bring my brother-in-law home from Syria. You bring all of them home. And you come back yourself because wounded doesn't mean finished. Mac gripped his hand. Blake, watching you recover reminded me why this matters. Why we keep fighting even when it's hard. Thank you. The departure came at 0400 hours on a dark morning. The C-17 Globemaster III sat on the tarmac, engines running, ramp down and waiting. The task force assembled in full combat gear, weapons, checked equipment, verified. Colonel Brennan stood on the tarmac in dress uniform, this final send-off his last official act before retirement. General Blackwell had flown in personally to observe the deployment. Brennan approached Mac and saluted. She returned the salute crisply. Major Holloway, bring our people home. Yes, sir, all of them. The task force boarded the aircraft. 32 warriors heading into hostile territory for a mission that Pentagon computers predicted had a 66% chance of catastrophic failure. The C-17 lifted into the pre-dawn darkness. Max sat in the troop compartment, the custom shoulder brace Sullivan had provided secured in place. 10% more function. 10% that might mean everything. Lieutenant Aldrich sat beside her. Nervous, ma'am. Terrified. Fear means you're paying attention. My job is turning fear into focus. Captain Hammond approached. Ma'am, final systems check complete. Team is ready. We've got 2 hours to drop zone. Sergeant Major Sullivan appeared from the rear. Major logistics secured. Medical supplies verified. Extraction coordinates confirmed with air support. Max stood moving to the center where all 32 team members could see her. In 2 hours, we jump into hell to bring 4 Americans home. I won't lie. Some of us might not come back, but I will adapt to whatever happens. I will find solutions when standard answers fail, and I will not leave anyone behind. Now let's prove that wounded warriors don't just belong in combat, we excel at it. The task force responded as one. Hooah! The flight lasted 11 hours with 1 refueling stop. Mac used the time to review the operation plan for the 100th time, memorizing every contingency, every fallback position, every alternative approach if the primary plan failed. The Syrian desert appeared below at 2300 hours local time. The C-17's ramp opened, revealing darkness and stars in the beginning of the mission that would define everything. 2 minutes. The jumpmaster's voice cut through the cabin. Mac ran through her final checks. Oxygen system functional. Altimeter calibrated. Weapon secured. Reserve chute accessible. The halo jump would put them at 25,000 feet, requiring oxygen until they reached breathable altitude at 15,000. 1 minute. The task force stood, formed up, equipment checked by the soldier behind them in line. Mac was third in the stick, Hammond second, Aldrich fifth. Sullivan would jump last, ensuring everyone cleared the aircraft. 30 seconds. The green light flashed. The jumpmaster pointed at the first soldier. Go! Go, go! Bodies launched into darkness at 1-second intervals. Mac reached the ramp, felt the slipstream tearing at her gear, stepped into void. The fall was silent and terrifying and exhilarating. 25,000 feet of empty air between her and Syrian desert. She held stable position, watching her altimeter, maintaining separation from other jumpers whose chem-light markers glowed in the darkness around her. At 15,000 feet, she disconnected her oxygen. At 5,000, she deployed her chute. The opening shock yanked her upward, the canopy blossoming black against black skyline. The landing zone appeared below a flat section of desert 6 kilometers from the target compound. Max steered toward it, flared her chute, hit the ground running. Her shoulder protested the impact but held. She gathered her chute, moved to the rally point. 32 soldiers materialized from the darkness. No injuries, no equipment failures. Perfect insertion. Weapons check, Mac ordered quietly. 5 minutes, then we move. The approach march used a Wadi system that provided concealed movement toward the target. Mac led from the front, navigation by GPS and terrain features memorized from satellite imagery. Her shoulder ached from the jump impact, but the pain was manageable. At 2 kilometers from target, Hammond raised his fist. The formation halted. Movement ahead, he whispered into the radio. 2 hostiles, 500 meters walking patrol. Mac considered options: bypass and avoid engagement, or eliminate the patrol to prevent compromise of the main assault. Sullivan, take your element and neutralize. Suppressed weapons. No alerts. Sullivan's 4-person team moved like ghosts. 2 minutes later, her voice came back. Targets down, continuing. The compound appeared exactly where intelligence had promised. 3 buildings surrounded by low walls, defensive positions visible in the infrared scopes. 40-plus heat signatures inside the compound. 4 separate heat signatures in the southeast building, isolated from the others. The hostages. Mac checked her watch. 02:57. 3 minutes to assault time. The plan called for sequential building clearance using suppressed weapons and stealth for as long as possible. All elements final positions. Assault in 3 minutes. The team flowed into position. Hammond's element would breach the northwest building where most ISIS fighters slept. Aldrich would secure the courtyard and prevent reinforcement. Sullivan would lead the hostage rescue team into the southeast building. Mac would coordinate from the command position, maintaining overview and adapting to complications. 0300 hours. Execute, execute, execute. Hammond's team moved first. The door charge was precisely measured, loud enough to breach, but not loud enough to alert the entire compound. They flowed into the building, suppressed weapons coughing quietly. Room clearance by the numbers professional and lethal. Aldrich's team secured the courtyard. No movement yet from the other buildings. Perfect execution so far. Sullivan approached the hostage building. This breach had to be different. Hostages inside meant no explosives, no grenades, surgical precision required. Hostage building. We're at the door, Sullivan whispered. Then everything went wrong. An ISIS fighter emerged from the latrine, saw Aldrich's team, screamed an alert before being shot. The compound erupted like an anthill kicked by a boot. Fighters poured from buildings, muzzle flashes strobing in the darkness, the suppressed phase of the operation ending in a heartbeat. Contact, contact, all elements engage. Mac's voice cut through the chaos. Machine gun fire raked across the courtyard from a position the intelligence had missed. 2 of Aldrich's soldiers went down wounded, but not dead. The element that should have been stealth became direct assault in seconds. Mac's mind raced through options. The standard plan was failing, adaptation required, now. Hammond suppressed that machine gun position. Aldrich fall back to the southeast wall and set up defensive perimeter. Sullivan, you're clear to breach hostage building. Go now. Her shoulder chose that moment to seize completely. The stress of the jump, the weapon carry, the tension had pushed the damaged joint past its limit. Her left arm went partially numb, the same sensation as the traverse wall, but worse. She forced herself to focus through the pain. Command didn't require 2 functional arms. It required a functional brain. Hammond, I need that machine gun silenced in 30 seconds, or we abort. Working on it, ma'am. Hammond's voice was strained but controlled. She heard him directing his team, repositioning for angle on the machine gun nest. An RPG round streaked across the compound, detonating against the wall where Aldrich's team had taken position. The explosion was close enough that Mac felt the overpressure through the radio. Aldrich status. Still in the fight, ma'am, but we're pinned down, cannot advance to support Sullivan. The operation was fragmenting. Elements isolated. casualties mounting, the machine guns still firing, and Sullivan's team was inside the hostage building alone, cut off from support. This was the moment Brennan had warned about. When plans failed, when standard solutions didn't work, when a leader's ability to adapt under pressure determined whether soldiers lived or died. Mac looked at the tactical display on her tablet with her one functional hand, saw the problem clearly. The machine gun position had perfect fields of fire across the courtyard. Any direct assault would result in catastrophic casualties. But the position had one weakness. It faced the courtyard, not the exterior wall behind it. Hammond ceased suppression, fall back to my position. Ma'am, Hammond's confusion was evident. Execute now. Hammond's element and withdrew under covering fire, reaching Mac's position 30 seconds later. Ma'am, what's the plan? Mac pointed at her tablet, showing the exterior approach to the machine gun position. We go outside the compound wall, circle around, hit them from behind where they're not expecting attack. Hammond studied the route. That's 800 meters of exposed movement. If they spot us, they won't, because Aldrich is going to keep their attention focused on the courtyard. Aldrich, can you hear me? Yes, ma'am. I need you to generate enough fire to make them think you are preparing to assault their position. Make it loud. Make it aggressive. Keep them looking at you. Roger that, ma'am. We'll make some noise. Mac turned to Hammond. You're leading the assault. I can't physically breach that position with one functional arm, but I can guide you there and coordinate the attack. Hammond met her eyes. Understanding dawned. This was trust. This was the lesson her injury had taught. When you couldn't execute personally, you empowered others to execute for you. I won't let you down, ma'am. I know. Now move. Hammond's element circled the compound exterior, while Aldrich's team opened up with everything they had. Tracer rounds streaked across the courtyard. Grenades detonated against the machine gun position's defensive wall. Enough firepower to convince the ISIS fighters that the main assault was coming from the courtyard. Mac followed Hammond's progress on her GPS, her right hand managing the tablet, while her left arm hung useless. The pain was extraordinary, but she had learned in Kandahar that pain could be weaponized, could be transformed into focus. Hammond, you're 50 meters from target. Aldrich increased fire in 10 seconds. The diversionary fire intensified. Under its cover, Hammond's team reached the blind side of the machine gun position. Breach on my mark. Hammond's voice was steady. 3, 2, 1, to breach. The explosion of Hammond's door charge was followed immediately by the sharp reports of rifles. The machine gun went silent. Bodies fell. The position was secured. Machine gun neutralized. Hammond's voice carried triumph. Aldrich, advance Sullivan's status on hostages. We've got them, ma'am, Sullivan's voice came back. 4 hostages, all alive, mobile enough for extraction. But we've got a problem. Building is surrounded, cannot exit without coming under fire. Max studied the tactical display. Sullivan was trapped in the hostage building. The courtyard between her position and the extraction route was still contested. ISIS fighters were regrouping, preparing to counterattack. Standard extraction was impossible, but standard wasn't the only option. Sullivan, hold position. Hammond, can you get to the courtyard north wall? Affirmative, ma'am. Do it. Aldrich, when Hammond is in position, I need you to make them think you are extracting south. Make it obvious. Draw their attention. And what's the real extraction route, ma'am? North, through Hammond's secured position. They'll be watching south while we move north. The deception took 3 minutes to execute. Aldrich made a show of preparing to move south using smoke grenades and repositioning that ISIS fighters could see. Their fire shifted to block the southern route. Meanwhile, Sullivan moved the hostages north through the building's rear exit. Hammond's element provided covering fire from the secured machine gun position. The hostages crossed open ground while ISIS fighters focused on the wrong direction. Hostages secured, Sullivan reported, moving to rally point. But the extraction wasn't complete. The helicopter was inbound, but the landing zone was still under potential fire from ISIS positions. Air support, this is Atlas 6. LZ is not secure. Needs suppression on grid coordinates I'm sending now. The Apache gunships that had been orbiting beyond ISIS observation range banked hard and streaked toward the compound. Their 30mm cannons tore into ISIS positions with devastating effect. The remaining fighters broke and ran. LZ is secure, extraction bird, inbound 30 seconds. The Black Hawk flared into the landing zone exactly on schedule. The task force loaded with practiced efficiency. 4 hostages, 32 soldiers, 2 wounded but no dead. Mac was last aboard, her right hand gripping the skid while her left arm hung useless. Hands pulled her into the helicopter as it lifted, banking away from the compound that was now erupting with secondary explosions as ammunition cooked off. She collapsed onto the bench, seating her shoulders, screaming, her body shaking with adrenaline dump. But they had done it. Against odds that Pentagon had calculated at 34% success probability, they had adapted and overcome and completed the mission. Captain Hammond sat across from her, grinning, despite the blood on his uniform from a grazing wound. Ma'am, that was the most beautiful example of tactical adaptation I've ever witnessed. You turned a failing operation into a successful rescue using nothing but creative problem solving. Sergeant Major Sullivan appeared with a medical kit. Ma'am, let me look at that shoulder. Hostages first, Mac replied. I can wait. The flight back to base took 40 minutes. Mac spent it ensuring her wounded received proper care and the hostages understood they were safe. Her shoulder could wait. Command meant putting others first. They landed at the forward operating base as dawn broke over the desert. General Blackwell was waiting on the tarmac, having flown in from Qatar to personally oversee the mission outcome. Major Holloway, report. Mac climbed down from the helicopter, her left arm still non-functional, and saluted with her right hand. Mission complete, ma'am. 4 hostages recovered alive. 2 wounded from our element, both stable. 0 killed in action. Blackwell returned the salute, then smiled. Outstanding work, Major. Colonel Brennan is going to be very pleased. The medical team insisted on examining Mac's shoulder before she could file her after-action report. The diagnosis was what she had expected: severe inflammation of the damaged nerve cluster, temporary loss of function that would recover with rest and treatment, no permanent additional damage. You're lucky, Major, the doctor said. Another hour of stress on that joint, and you might have torn something that couldn't be repaired. You need to rest that shoulder for at least 2 weeks. I will, after I complete my paperwork. She spent the next 6 hours writing the comprehensive after-action report that high-risk missions required. Every decision, every adaptation, every moment when the plan failed and alternative approaches succeeded. The report would become part of the military's institutional knowledge, teaching future officers that rigid adherence to plans was less valuable than flexible adaptation to changing circumstances. General Blackwell reviewed the report personally. Major, this is exceptional. Not just the mission execution, but the analysis. You've documented how wounded warriors bring unique value precisely because injury teaches lessons about adaptation that unwounded soldiers never learn. This will change policy discussions at the highest levels. That was Colonel Brennan's intent, ma'am, to prove that wounded warriors deserve combat leadership roles. He chose well when he selected you, Major. Now go get some sleep. You've earned it. But sleep would have to wait. There was one more communication Mac needed to make. She found a secure computer terminal and composed a message to Blake Winters at Walter Reed. Blake, mission complete. Your brother-in-law performed brilliantly. He led the assault that broke the enemy's key position. I'm bringing him home safe, just like I promised. And I'm bringing myself home too, because wounded doesn't mean finished. It means adapted. Thank you for teaching me that. Major Holloway. The flight back to Fort Bragg departed 12 hours later. Mac slept for most of it, her body finally releasing the tension that had sustained her through 72 hours of mission preparation and execution. They landed at Fort Bragg at 0600 hours on a bright North Carolina morning, the same tarmac where they had departed. But everything had changed. Colonel Marcus Brennan stood waiting in dress uniform, though he had officially retired 48 hours earlier. Beside him stood Blake Winters, upright on prosthetic legs, without crutches for the first time. The task force filed off the C-17, exhausted but triumphant. Mac was last to deplane, carrying the wooden box containing Colonel James Brennan's combat infantry badge. She approached Brennan and saluted. He returned the salute, then extended his hand. Welcome home, Major. I heard about the mission, about how you adapted when the plan failed, about how you turned potential catastrophe into successful rescue through tactical creativity. Mac opened the wooden box. Sir, I'm returning this as promised. Your father's legacy is secure. Wounded warriors can lead, can adapt, can succeed at the highest levels of special operations. Brennan took the badge, held it for a moment, then placed it back in Mac's hands. Keep it, Major. You've earned the right to carry this forward. My father would want you to have it, would want you to remember that limitations can be transformed into advantages. Blake Winters stepped forward, walking with careful deliberation but walking nonetheless. Ma'am, I told you wounded doesn't mean finished. You proved it in Syria. Now I'm proving it here. Next month I start training to return to active duty. Mac felt tears threatening for the first time since the operation began. Blake, that's outstanding. Learned it from watching you, ma'am. Adaptation is strength. General Blackwell appeared, having flown back separately. Major Holloway, there's one more ceremony we need to complete, if you'll follow me. The base parade ground had been prepared for a formal ceremony. The entire 82nd Airborne Division stood in formation. At the center, a podium with senior officers assembled. Blackwell led Mac to the front. Major Mackenzie Holloway front and center. Mac took position, her shoulders still aching, but her spine straight. Major Holloway, for extraordinary heroism in connection with military operations against an armed enemy during Operation Atlas Stone, you are hereby awarded the Distinguished Service Cross, the second highest military decoration for valor. Mac stood in shock as Blackwell pinned the medal to her uniform. Your actions in Syria demonstrated the highest traditions of military service. Your tactical adaptation under extreme pressure resulted in the successful rescue of 4 American civilians against overwhelming odds. Your leadership serves as proof that wounded warriors bring unique and valuable capabilities to special operations. The assembled division erupted in applause, not polite ceremony applause, real appreciation from soldiers who understood what had been proven. Brennan stepped forward to shake her hand. My father would have been proud to serve with you, Major. You've honored his legacy and created your own. The ceremony concluded with one final surprise. Sergeant Major Sullivan approached with another medal case. Ma'am, one more thing. This arrived from Afghanistan. Inside was the Silver Star that had been recommended 6 months earlier for her actions during Operation Copper Dagger, carrying Blake Winters across 420 meters of hostile terrain while wounded herself. The paperwork got delayed, Sullivan explained, but General Blackwell expedited it. You're authorized to wear both decorations. Mac looked at the 2 medals, Silver Star for Kandahar, Distinguished Service Cross for Syria, both awarded for missions where her injury had been factor not obstacle, where adaptation had been required, where wounded warrior status had taught lessons that made success possible. The formation dismissed. Soldiers approached to offer congratulations. Hammond clasped her hand. Ma'am, I was wrong about everything. You're the finest combat leader I've ever served under. Aldrich appeared with his phone. Blake's watching the live stream from Walter Reed. He says congratulations and he'll see you at the physical therapy session next week. He's determined to keep up with your recovery schedule. Sullivan handed Mac a final package. One more thing, ma'am. Transfer orders. You're being assigned as Permanent Operations Officer for JSOC Special Missions Task Force. General Blackwell specifically requested you. Seems they value officers who can adapt under pressure. Mac opened the orders, reading the assignment that would define the next phase of her career. Leading special operations missions, proving every day that wounded warriors could excel at the highest levels. She looked across the parade ground at Brennan, who was watching from a distance. He nodded once, a gesture of respect and validation. His father's legacy secured. His son's death given meaning through policy change that would allow wounded warriors to serve. Blake Winters approached, walking with increasing confidence on his prosthetics. Ma'am, permission to speak freely. Always Blake. 6 months ago, you carried me across 400 meters of hell and saved my life. Today I'm walking. Next month, I'm returning to active duty. In 6 months, I'm deploying again. And it's all because you refuse to accept that wounded means finished. He saluted her. Thank you for teaching me that adaptation is strength, ma'am. That scars don't define capability. That wounded warriors bring something special to combat operations because we've learned lessons that perfect soldiers never will. Mac returned the salute, then pulled him into a brief embrace. Blake, you taught me as much as I taught you. Watching you recover reminded me why we keep fighting. The sun climbed higher over Fort Bragg. The humidity pressed down like a living thing. just as it had on the morning of the PT test that had changed everything. But Mac no longer feared obstacles, no longer doubted her capabilities. Her shoulder ached as it always would, a permanent reminder of Kandahar and the price of service. But pain meant she was alive, meant she was still in the fight, meant she had another mission ahead, another chance to prove that wounded warriors belonged exactly where she stood, in command, in combat, in history. The traverse wall had beaten her that day on the obstacle course, but it hadn't broken her. Syria had tested her limits, but adaptation had overcome limitation, and Major Mackenzie Holloway was ready for whatever came next, carrying Colonel James Brennan's combat infantry badge as a reminder that wounded warriors had been proving themselves for generations. The legacy continued, the mission continued, the proof continued. Wounded didn't mean finished. It meant evolved, adapted, stronger in ways that perfect soldiers could never understand. She walked toward the headquarters building, her stride confident despite the ache in her shoulder. Captain Derek Hammond fell into step beside her, no longer the skeptic, but the convert. "Ma'am, what's our next mission?" Max smiled. "Whatever it is, Captain will adapt and overcome. That's what wounded warriors do." The door closed behind them, the story complete. The vindication earned not through perfection, but through the refusal to let limitations define possibility. Major Mackenzie Holloway had proven what Colonel James Brennan had known in the 1990s and what Blake Winters was proving now in the 2020s. Wounded warriors don't quit. They adapt. They overcome. They excel. And they write their chapters of military history in determination, innovation, and the absolute certainty that scars create strength. The mission was complete. The legacy secured. The proof undeniable.